exclusive content only for the Patreon users. But it does lead me into one of the most genius ideas that I actually picked up from your mom with business.
From my mother.
From your mother.
Pam.
Pam.
How do you know her?
I don't.
Okay.
But I'm scared of her.
Okay. Many are.
Yeah.
Many people are scared of my mother.
So she I don't know if she still is, but she was in charge of your AR.
She was.
Yes. And so we had a project at our house, right?
Uh-huh.
And
she has gracefully stepped back from AR.
Okay. And so I get an invoice, and bold on the invoice is a scripture verse that pretty much says, like, if you don't pay your debts, you're going to hell.
That's right.
I can't remember the reference.
That's
it
right.
might have been. It might have been from the Message, maybe not King James. But
it's usually something like, he who owes money is a slave to,
lender,
something like that, right? It's Old Testament.
Yeah.
It's in the.
It was like.
It's in Deuteronomy, probably.
Yeah, she was almost like, not casting a spell, but
That's right.
Hey, if you don't pay this, I'm praying against you.
That's right. Well, that doesn't work on everybody. So there you go.
Yeah, but it is on there. Yeah, the rich rules over the poor.
That's the one. Proverbs 22:7.
But here's the thing: is I got multiple. She rotated through.
That's right.
There's
5 or 6
if the first one doesn't work.
That's right.
Yeah, I think
right.
the last one might have just been like Jesus wept. It's like, before we go, let's try one more before we go file a lien. Take this guy to court.
Jesus wept. So collections, I always tell people business would be fun except for equipment and collections. And those are my 2 least favorite parts of the business.
Well, it's tough, because you have to, the equipment's rough. Like you should put away for stuff to break. Is that what you're talking about? Like stuff breaking?
But it's just always breaking.
Yeah, it's always breaking.
Yeah.
Vans, trucks.
Yeah, people are running into mailboxes. They're running, it's.
Here's the worst for me is when they don't tell me. And then I literally got served papers at my house from a speeding ticket that happened 12 months ago in one of my company vehicles through a school zone. Like, they didn't get pulled over, right? It just did. And so then they sent it to this guy or to my business, and my business, I guess, just didn't pay it. Or they gave it to the employee and said, hey, you need to pay this. And he just didn't pay it.
They just lost it.
So I get served because the vehicle's in my name.
Now, was this the new camera in front of Southwood?
They're over all of them.
Okay.
Like, there's all the school zones in Caddo now, I think, have cameras.
Okay.
And so it's not the first one. Then the second one, the employee said, oh, I'll pay it, and use the company Amex.
Oh. Hey, man, but guess what? You're not going to jail.
I didn't get served.
That's right. You're not going to, and you're getting points.
I have another one. This happened. Hey, the points. This happened probably 10 years ago. I was fairly new into my business. I get served papers for failure to. I got served papers that had a bench warrant out for my arrest for failure to appear at court for 2 traffic violations. Mm-hmm. So I go to the DA's office, and I'm like, hey, this wasn't me. And of course, they're like, oh, yeah, it wasn't you. What's the date of the ticket? And so we pull up they pull up the video, and it's like an old black man that worked for me in my company. No, he was in his truck and didn't have a license plate on it or a driver's license. So they say, well, what's your name? He tells them my name.
He just says late now.
Yeah. And then he says, what's your address? Tells him my personal address.
Is this your neighbor?
No, he worked for me.
Oh, okay. I got you.
The best. He signs his name on the ticket.
Yeah. He signs his name, not yours.
His name. He didn't know how to spell my name.
Okay. Well, there you go.
He knew how to say it.
There you go. And so, listen, all of this stuff you're talking about hits your credit report. And so that's why we send the extra firm verses out.
Yes.
With your statements.
Yeah, you have to.
That's right.
Yeah, that's a free little tidbit for our listeners.
You're
How many listeners do we have a report yet from our first episode?
we run something called Credit Score Through Christ.
Oh,
and your score is exceptionally low.
Is that like the opposite of the Chinese credit score that they're working on?
The social
credit score. Yeah,
I'm sure that's
this is spiritual credit score.
That's right.
Hey, you know what? We're joking. You can make money off of that.
We have
spiritual
lost
credit score.
Every listener.
You think Stephen Furtick might? Joel Osteen would definitely get
That's
behind this.
But that's not what we're here to talk
No,
about.
we aren't. So I asked, until we build up our massive audience,
That's right.
I asked fellow business owners that I know just to send me some questions that might be helpful for them,
Yeah.
or it might be helpful for business owners, small business owners. And one of the questions that came up 2 or 3 times was, should I, what's better, to acquire a business, an existing business, or to do a startup? And I thought that was a very good question.
Sounds like a topic of an episode.
Yes, that's the topic of this episode.
Timely.
Or future.
That's right. That's right.
So, I guess that's our format is let's pose a question and let's see where it takes us.
I like it.
All right, you, just for reference, there's a podcast I want us to listen to also discuss.
Okay.
And I think I mentioned it to you, but it's about first generation, second generation, third generation in businesses. So I'll send it to you. Maybe we can talk about that next week.
I like that.
So
Yeah.
you are a third generation business owner.
Correct.
And so your startups that you've done have been really starting new locations. Would you say that?
Yes. So 10 years ago, we started our store in Houghton, and we are currently building a store in Blanchard that should be open I hope in April.
Yep.
So big undertakings, simply because not only were we starting a new business, but we had a construction project that we had to take care of as well. There was, for us, ideally you find the structure, kind of like what you're doing now with your companies. You find the structure, you go in, you rehab it, remodel it, tailor it to your needs. For the need of the community, they did not have the facilities there. So I know a lot of people are down on this idea of new construction, but for us to have the opportunity in the market, we felt like we had to basically build it. And that is a guaranteed way to grow very, very slow. Because again, why so many people are down on it, it's such a drain on resources. Because to start the business, to operate the business, to bring it up, I mean, obviously you're going to have a lot of money with inventory. You're going to have a lot of money in sort of technology expenses. Everything from your in-store decorations, your cabinets, your computers, your equipment.
Staffing? I mean, you're having to hire
Your
staff
staffing.
on a payroll for a business
right.
that's not open yet, right? To train them and...
Correct. And then along with staffing being one of the biggest annual expenses, your inventory is a tremendous expense. So you couple all that and understanding that there's a real cash flow need to keep all that going, couple all that with a massive construction project that goes along with it. So when I say it's a guaranteed way to grow slow, you're at a turtle's pace because it's so resource intensive to do it that way. Now, you can make an argument to say, well, listen, your ceiling in a greenfield or new build out is higher because you can build that facility any way you want it. You can have as much land as you want. You can have as much pavement as you want. It's really what can the market sustain. And that is true. But from my perspective, it makes it very, very difficult to just grow because it just makes you,
Well,
pace yourself.
that's a business principle, right? I mean, the bigger the ship is, the harder it is to turn,
Correct.
right?
Correct.
And that would be a principle to dig into as well. But that is how do you stay ahead of the curve as you grow and get bigger and bigger? But
Right.
that's interesting. So let's do this. What would be a handful? Let's talk about pros and cons of a startup.
Okay.
Pros and cons of a
Of
startup.
either way. So we're going to talk startup
Let's talk
first.
about the good and the bad and the ugly. So I just for reference, I've started. Well, all of my businesses have been startups, and so I'm probably running or overseeing or involved in 6 businesses on a daily basis, all startups.
Yeah.
So, I think that when I think back through of why I did a startup instead of acquiring, well, one, early on, I didn't have any capital, and a bank's not going to loan me money with an unproven track record.
And your Christ scores.
Yeah,
What it is.
my spiritual credit score was low back then.
Right.
Coming out of college. So yeah, so yeah, that so I didn't have any money, right? So when I think of resource allocations, right, I had my energy, my time, and my personal vehicle. I mean, that's what I had,
Right.
right? And so I just didn't have the means to acquire anything, and so you just kind of go in. So that would be a reason to do a startup if you literally just have no capital. So I mean, I would say other ways around that. Obviously, bringing on a partner that might have money.
Yep.
So so that would be So a pro would be to do a startup. Now I think about it, you actually have startup cost, right? So you are spending some money.
You do.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of work.
Yeah. A lot of work.
The pros, when I think about the pros on it, obviously you're able to kind of dictate the culture or determine the culture from the word jump.
So
Whereas if you're coming into, existing team members, employees, perhaps they've had their ways of doing things, or they've had the previous ownership's preferences. And so sometimes it's very hard to come in and see that change and integration come through. We saw this with a little mini acquisition that we tried and really struggled and ultimately wasn't successful because, the processes that we had weren't ready. The people that remained, we had some really good people, but we were missing some key pieces that when ownership left, that went away. And so we struggled with that acquisition because we weren't ready, they weren't ready, and ultimately it just wasn't a good fit. So there's not always a guarantee that an acquisition is going to be a slam dunk.
Yep. Well, I think that, if you go into one of my favorite books, obviously, as a business owner, is E-Myth. You've read that.
I have. Yes, I have.
And so when you do an acquisition, usually what happens is the manager role leaves.
That's right.
Because it's usually the person that owns it is managing it.
Correct.
Right. And so the whole premise of that book is you have to have a entrepreneur, a visionary, you have to have a manager, and you have to have a technician. And so would you say that that's what happened in that instance?
I think in the instance, it was, we learned a lot. We learned a lot because the technician aspect did leave when ownership left. When that went away, it became obvious that, this guy was the one who was holding it all together. And so when you take the glue that was holding everything together, it was very, very difficult because to find, because typically with ownership, there's no one more motivated than the owner operator. I mean, it's his heart and soul that he's put into it. Sometimes it's many, many years. It's his legacy. It's his identity. It's all those things. There is no better motivation than something like that. So that person is holding so many things together. Now, the E-Myth, in the stage of evolution for businesses, I think very few businesses get to the place that the E-Myth is pushing you towards, and it's a great read. And we're working on it, personally. But so many of these businesses are what I call heliocentric, which means there's an owner leader in the center and everyone else spokes out from him. It's not a traditional hierarchy like you would experience with other companies. So if there's a problem with a piece of equipment, it's what does Joe think? If there's a problem with sales, it's what does Joe think? If there's a problem with HR, Joe's HR. So everybody keeps coming back to the center. And I think that acquiring a business like that can be very, very risky because when Joe goes away, all those decisions, all that glue goes away. And then if you don't have the processes to quickly come in and, bring them, bring them process, you're going to struggle.
Yeah. And I think another thing too, looking at the books for a company like that, that role that needs to be hired is not on the books previously.
No.
Right. And so you're like, now I have to pay someone well to come in here. And then it's like, well, is it even profitable at that point?
Correct.
But yeah, I think so. Then I would even go into this, and this is another topic. But I remember early on, Business Coach for me, one of the best things that we worked through. Every time we met, it was the goal for me and this coach's relationship was to make my company sellable. And obviously it goes a lot into that. But what I was finding is, identifying where I bottleneck the company, or I have to be a part of the daily operations. Because if I want to sell a company, it can't involve me being the center of everything.
Correct.
And
So having the heliocentric model devalues your company.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because an outside acquirer looking in is going to look in and they're going to see the exact same things we're talking
Yeah.
about. So it looks like Leighton is really kind of
Yeah.
running the show. And if Leighton goes away,
Yeah.
I'm interested in buying this company, but I'm not interested in maybe going
Yeah.
in and changing, changing tires and doing all that kind of thing.
Yeah, we see that a lot with investment properties, like a mobile home park, where the guy owns it, does all of the work on the stuff, right? He's like, oh yeah, I only had $5,000 of expenses last year.
Like,
I'm
oh,
like,
that's
you
great.
You spent 40 hours a week. Yeah, I mean, nobody's going to come and do that.
That's right.
And so you have to factor that in. So thinking through a startup, yeah, the pros, culture definitely, and little capital you can leverage. Kind of what your resources you have. Cons are a lot.
Cons of a startup.
Startup,
Sure.
what are some struggles that somebody that's wanting to do a startup just knows that they're going to face?
So the startup for me, again, it's the same thing I mentioned earlier. It takes you a long time to build your customer base. It takes a long time, depending on your industry, to build up your inventory levels. It takes a long time to build your cash flow up, and it can be done. But it's going to slow down. If your vision is, hey, I want to grow fast and I want to do big things, it's going to be very difficult to do it this way, because it just takes so much time and so much training to put into people. Whereas I've been listening to a few podcasts with some very, very sophisticated movers in private equity space, as well as a guy named Brad Jacobs, who has spun off several billion-dollar companies. Their approach is so different. Their approach is we're going to acquire, we're going to integrate, because at the end of the day, we can buy your company for a multiple of maybe 4 times EBITDA, 5 times EBITDA. But once you leverage this package of businesses together, you move into the next tier of equity. And when you move into the next tier of private equity, they may be trading at 14 times EBITDA. So they're just basically trying to arbitrage the gap between buying a company at 4 times EBITDA and then flipping the package at 14, 15 turns, which is, it's great thinking, right?
Yeah.
But it requires massive, massive dollars. That's a very sophisticated outfit that's doing that.
Yeah.
And so, and how else could you grow a $1 billion company in a few years without that strategy?
Yeah.
But
go into the person who's like, working for another company and they want to branch off and just do a startup on their own.
Right. Much different.
And what is that? And what struggles are they going to face? I think of, well, there's just so many of them. I think one is, it goes back to E-Myth. Just because you're good at a technical skill does not make you a good business owner. Right. So when I think back to my early days of my first company I started, I was wearing all the hats, right? And so I was working 80 hours a week because I would work during the day, then I would come home and I'd have to put on the accounting hat and work, through that. And then so I was the technician on the field, I was the manager, I was bringing in business, I was the entrepreneur, I was doing all of it, right?
Yeah. And I think you really pointed at something for the person who is looking to start their own business. So number one, I think it would be understand what your strengths are.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're the best plumber out in the field, or if you're the best HVAC technician or roofer out in the field, do you have the skill set to translate that into an administrative role where you can look out over your books, your finances, keep good tabs of your cash flow, your HR? All those things are a different skill set, really, and different tools that you would have to use.
Yeah.
So first off, for that person, it is going to be a struggle moving from technician to administrator. That's a tough role, and a lot of people, to be quite honest, people either typically prefer one or the other. It's rare to see somebody who says, I'm the best welder out there, but I also am growing a welding company with 70 technicians up under me, and we're gonna blow this thing
up. Well,
up.
I think it's just having a plan of, I can live a tilted life for a season. I can put in the 78 hours a week for a season if you have the skill to do both, right? But then I also see, a lot of times what happens is they, have a spouse fulfill the other role, which leads into a whole nother, which can be a great thing.
That's right.
Then you're probably spending money on therapy, so which is good too. So yeah, so that's always, but that goes into your resources. You know, who do you have around you that can help you out, or taking on a partner. You know, when I think of my partnerships, half of my businesses I own by myself, other half I have partners in them. Really, I have partners in all my businesses, even though they might not be owners on paper. They're my partners. I mean, they're running the company for me, right, or with me. And so when I think of that. The worst businesses, I feel like having two owners or two or three owners, your likelihood of succeeding is probably greater. But what happens is most people form those partnerships based off of like friendships, or maybe they're both two really good plumbers, right? And not knowing. And so my most successful businesses or ventures have been where my counterpart or my partner is the total opposite of me. Right. Because I just know, I think I'm 30,000 foot view all the time. I'm thinking 5 years down the road. But if you're going to start talking about what we need to do today at daily operations, I check out.
Yeah.
Right. So I need that. I need somebody that's detailed and organized, because I'm not.
And I think your approach in your partnership is the best way to proceed. If I'm thinking about that young technician right now who's out there and he's learning the trade and he's learning the skills and he's learning what it takes to do the job and do it well, I'm thinking the best path forward for many people in that circumstance is to find a partner that can help you with, the capital, can help you with the business, kind of the sophistication of the taxes and all those things. I think your approach is the best approach. We use a format in our business called Traction, and so it's just a way to do some long-term, short-term, and medium-term goal setting. And Traction really, really encourages two things at the top, and that is, one is a visionary, and the other is what they call an integrator. So to truly grow a business out and to see it scale, you've got to have both of these people, and very rarely are they the same thing. You just said, when I start to hear about operations, I just check out. It's boring. I
would just walk out of the room.
That's right.
They're like, hey, we're letting go.
That's right.
Yeah.
Because honestly, for people who have more of a visionary wiring, that God's given you, that, you are 30,000 feet, you are thinking 10 years, 20 years in the future, whereas you need the integrator who can come in and say, okay, here's today, here's the processes we're working on, here's our procedures that we're building out, and the connection, the collection of the two talents put together, it's unstoppable in a way that just one person who's working 80 hours, it's just draining your batteries.
Well, and I think that the hesitancy, right, there's a couple hesitancies in partnering. Is one, choosing the right person. Obviously, that was a big one. I always said early on I would never have business partners, but I had a great mentor and friend, Jim Malsh, who passed away a couple months ago. He told me one time when I was starting the real estate firm, and I was like, do I want a partner or not? And he said, do you want 100% of a really small pie or half of a really big one?
Right.
And that made a lot of sense. And so, so then it's just identifying that right person. But I think a lot of it's self-awareness. I think that a lot of times people do try to do all of it. And early on, I definitely I was involved too much in things that, I just messed it up. I had people on my team that were better at executing than I was, but I still wanted to be involved.
I see it all the time. We recently hired a store manager in a role that I'd been in, and I just see it time and time again where, number one, it's freeing for me because now I can take a bigger look at the company to try to project forward where we need to go. Because ultimately, if you're someone in that situation, you're being paid to think. And we think that our job is to, or many times to do, right? But ultimately, your job is to think.
I actually feel guilty. Me and my current business coach, I would say, I feel bad at times knowing I have team members doing, and I am, taking a step back to think and dream, right? And I feel bad, I feel guilty, because it's enjoyable to me. right?
Right.
I enjoy doing that. And I know that's my strength. That's why it's
Yeah.
fulfilling for me.
Yeah.
But I felt bad, and he would just have to kind of almost give me freedom in doing that, like put that in your calendar
Yeah.
to create space to do that.
Well, and if you think about in terms of the sustainability of your businesses, you think about the person who's in your business doing the work, who's interfacing with the customers, who's doing the day-to-day, that person is doing a very specific thing, and it's so needed. And delighting your customers has to come first. But ultimately, they're not sitting back and thinking about, okay, so if sort of an asteroid comes into our world, how do we pivot? Where are we going to go?
Sure.
What are we going to do? So somebody's got to sort of have that hand on the wheel. As people are doing other things on the ship, somebody's got to be looking forward and saying, you know what, in 5 years, this business model may not be as attractive as it was. And how can we pivot our resources and our talent to move in a direction that can be sustainable, viable, and successful for our people to come? So I think that you do feel guilty in a sense, but think about this. If everybody's got their head down working in the field, and nobody's looking at the weather report, you're going to be in trouble.
Yep. I agree. Yeah. But then that person is in the office doing, they just have to, knowing people's strengths is just so important, and getting their roles matched up is so important, because it just leads to burnout, frustration, right? I'm like, why isn't this job getting done? Well, a lot of times it's because they literally just can't do it.
Right.
They don't have the skill set to do it. And so I digress. But going back, another one that I found, and I'm just reflecting back on me doing my startup. Okay, so I was in a structured environment being a school teacher. And when I quit, I all of a sudden didn't have a boss telling me what to do, right? So I'm sitting here. I played a lot of golf my first year in business.
It's that 80-hour work week.
I thought that's what business owners did.
Right.
Play golf. I didn't think about getting money to play. So I mean, for me, part of my built-in accountability was just this: we were having kids, right? I mean, the day after I quit teaching, I found out my wife was pregnant with our second kid, and so I'm like, okay, well, I gotta do something here, or go back to teaching.
Yeah.
And so you kind of have to, but you have to be self-motivated, right? You cannot, and then I see that a lot, especially with men, where we procrastinate, and not having someone. Well, I'm also a real estate broker, and so I see that a ton in real estate agents. Just they might do busy work or something to keep them busy, or just not do anything, right? They're paralyzed to take action, and a lot of and then with the men in real estate, it's just a lot of procrastination.
And this is a bit of a digression, but I think that when you talk about, for the person who's considering starting something up or acquisition, regardless of those circumstances, you just mentioned something in your own startup, in that you became the owner of your own time. And what a blessing and what a curse. Because the blessing is that you do literally have the freedom and ability now to go play golf, to go watch a movie, to go, just do whatever you want throughout the day. Yeah. The problem behind that is that now there's not only your family is depending on you, so there's pressure there, but depending on the structure of your business, you may have multiple employees that are depending on you for the right your customers as well. I mean, there's no question. Yeah. So once you transition, and you become the owner of your own time, you think I see posts on Twitter all the time where people are kind of looking down on others who work normal jobs, who punch in and punch out. But I got to tell you, once you escape, quote unquote, escape that clocking in for the man, and you become the man or the woman, guess what? I mean, the pressure is now on, and you've got to maximize your time, because the freedom that you have comes with the burden of every second of the day. What am I doing to bring value to my customers and to my team members? Those income producing activities, what actually makes you money? Because you're procrastinating, you may be doing something that you feel comfortable doing, but is it bringing value to your customers? Is it making you money? Is playing golf. If you're playing golf with a potential client who's going to bring all this business, then hey, guess what? Maybe playing golf is an income producing activity. for most people.
It wasn't for me. But I think going back to E-Myth too, right? It's this idea of we want to get into own our own small business for freedom.
Absolutely.
But a year into it, 2 years into it, we realize it's anything but freedom.
That's right.
Now we're jealous of the person that can clock in, clock out.
That's right.
Right.
That's right.
And I remember 2015, probably 2016. Me and my wife took a trip. We like to travel. We were on this trip, and literally the whole time my phone is just going nuts. Right, and it's just going nuts, and I'm answering, and it's just frustrating. It's horrible, and that's when I started, with my business coach. Every meeting was, what are you doing that you can delegate to somebody else, right? And just start chiseling that away. And now, out of all of my companies going, I can go take a week off and not get one single phone call, which is great. That is freeing, right?
Yeah.
Not saying that they can't call me, but they.
So it seems like, and we're talking. This is our big question of the podcast about the acquisition, but versus startup. And I think that what it seems like is that in the stage of a person's evolution within their business, there's a mode in which both make sense. Mm-hmm. And the mode for you right now that you've created this team around you that's brought you more freedom through your own delegation, mm-hmm. that now you're probably better suited for an acquisition.
That's right.
if you chose that. Maybe your financial position would be different, your internal organization is different, mm-hmm. your policies and procedures are a little bit more advanced than what they were when you first started. Mm-hmm. So I think there's definitely a time and a place for either or, and it's all circumstantial. But it seems like for you right now, you'd be in a decent spot for an acquisition.
Yeah, one of my if you have a company you want to sell, contact us on our MySpace page.
Right.
No, so one of the analogies that my business partner in the real estate company said, his name's Adam, and he uses this analogy with real estate agents, but it applies to business as well. All business is that in your career early on, you're pushing a boulder up a hill, mm-hmm. but there does become a time where you cross the hill, and now gravity is working with you.
That's right.
Right, and so. Does that take 3 years, 4 years, 5 years? But that's definitely applies in business, right? Is that there is a point of time where all of the work and effort you've put in compounds into successes.
Well, and you earn that, that gravity kicks in when you learn to trust, mm-hmm. when you learn to truly delegate the right way.
Yeah.
When you learn to build into people, rather than basically just coming to this situation and thinking you're only taking from this, thinking I'm just gonna take what's owed to me, man. I'm just gonna get my money, because flipping that into building into people, building into teams, building into processes, where that's what shifts the gravity. It's not just the idea that you look up one day and go, oh man, this is so much easier. I mean, I think it's a deliberate mental shift, mm-hmm. that you have to put into trust and development of people that gets you there, right?
Yeah. I think that that's a really good point. And I think of like me and Adam, he's a process guy and I'm a people guy. Like I tell my kids when I'm taking them to school, I'm like, hey, if y'all don't want to go to college and you still want to be successful, the number one thing to learn is that people are your greatest asset, 100%, right? Mm-hmm. So then the shift that's happening right now, I just had this conversation yesterday with one of my managers, is we have been hiring in our trade companies. We've been hiring based off of having some experience in the field, right?
That's tough.
But we should be hiring based off of character, because we can develop them on the technical aspect. And some are harder, right? I mean, it's probably harder to train up a plumber than it might be a HVAC installer, right? But that's the longevity, right? Is finding these people with high character. And, in some instances, I'd rather them not have any experience, because they would probably learned it the wrong way, right? And so one of the great quotes I was going to mention, I heard a guy speaking, I think it was at a real estate conference. He was a broker, and they had been acquiring real estate companies. and the question came up, going into a new market, why don't you do a startup? And he said, our philosophy is a twig is better than a seed.
Yeah,
So
makes a lot of sense.
Even if it's just a one person office,
Right.
it's better than
And-
having nothing.
And I would imagine that operator that's on the stage is probably a sophisticated operator. They
Oh,
know
yeah.
what they're doing.
Oh, yeah.
And,
Oh,
and they're
100%.
ready for it.
100%.
So in the same podcast I was telling you about that I was listening to, the person said, when I go in and make an acquisition, first thing I do is I sit the entire team down. And I want to know two things. I want to know, hey, what are we doing really well that we need to keep doing? And then what are things that we're doing that are not serving us, that are not working? And there's a lot in those two questions. I mean, there's the tactics of what are we doing, what are we not doing?
Yep.
But there's also there's the listening to the existing team. You know, you're getting buy-in through their opinions and their thoughts. So it's not just, hey, I'm coming in, I know everything, I've got all the answers. Get behind me, let's roll. It's, hey, you guys have been doing this work. We think this company is valuable. We want to be a part of it with you. What do you think we can do to make it better? And so from an acquisition standpoint, this is more I think about kind of, you know, where I'd like to go and where I'd like to be. I think that's two powerful questions in terms of how to align a new organization with what you've done and how you've built it, because the twig is better than the seed.
Yeah.
The customer base is already there.
Yeah.
Most of your team can stick around with you. You probably won't hang on to everybody,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Particularly if you've got a vision.
Yeah.
But you know, ultimately having that twig rather than that seed, to me, is such an advantage, and you're growing faster. Remember that building that it took me 2 years to build? I'm up and running
Oh,
day
yeah.
one.
Yeah.
Big difference.
Yeah. One of the things I kind of made me think of this, asking those two questions, and this goes a little bit along the lines of that, but I remember hearing Andy Stanley speak years ago about organizations, and he said, this is a great question to ask any of your team members and you to ask as the owner of the company or organization, is if someone came in and took your position tomorrow, what decisions would they immediately make?
Okay, so explain that a little bit more.
So pretty much it's identifying the things that need to change in the organization that you're avoiding, right? If I came and ask your manager, hey, if I came and took over your position tomorrow, what decisions would I make the first day?
So
Or
you're
what
looking for,
changes would I make?
you're thinking for problems that have been avoided, essentially.
Yeah.
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 And that happens all the time, right? I avoid them too. So some of them, that gets into a whole nother rabbit trail. I have a question for you.
Sure.
Change the subject a little bit.
Okay.
All right. What is the biggest thing you took away from your career in music that applied to your business? Like what, I mean, how many years, first of all, I'll start with this. How many years were you on the road touring?
So we were heavy in it in 2003 through 2008.
Okay. So about 5 years.
So during that time, we would play anywhere from 100 to 200 plus shows a year. And we would be gone for sometimes months at a time. So,
Do you feel like you grew during that time?
no.
I didn't ask if you made money.
No. Well, and the truth of the matter is that there's so many things looking back now, you know, with just more exposure to people, to life, to business, you know, because for me, I was terrified of those music business people.
Yeah.
They were so intimidating, and they were so like, this is John Mayer's lawyer, or this is, you know, he lives in New York City, or this music manager that's managed these massive artists, and now he's on the phone with you and he's screaming at you and cussing at you, and you're just like, you don't know what to say. You don't know how to say to those people.
Yeah.
Being a business owner now, it would be much easier for me to sit down and say, listen, we have shared objectives. There's things we both want. How do we work together to get this? And to have a conversation like I would have with, you know, a customer or an employee today. I'm just much more comfortable having those types of conversations than I was back then. mostly terrified, but that's not that's not your question.
Well, I mean, yeah. Do you think you took anything positive away from that besides the music you created and memories? Like, is there anything that kind of, because you just decided one day, hey, we're not going back on tour. I'm going into the family business.
Right. So now we have two questions on the table. The question, what did I take from it? Ultimately, I think it upped my capacity for risk, because when you do something like that as seriously as we did it, we slept in vans. We would eat on $5 a day. We did the craziest things, from a financial perspective, but ultimately, and I say this, like lovingly, like you hit that layer of bottom, you understand that you're going to be okay. Yeah. You're okay. And you see this a lot with serial entrepreneurs, where they'll be on top of the world and then they'll be, bankrupt.
Yeah.
And so for me, who grew up as a sort of, a cautious young guy, I developed more of a tolerance for risk. And so when it came time to open this new business, and we had the thought of this could sink our entire operation, I thought to myself, I can live on $5 a day.
Yeah.
I can make it.
Yeah.
That's
the scramble.
I'll be okay.
I call that the scramble, right? Because I still do it now. I get bad news. I'm like, all right, worst case scenario, I got to sell my house, got to sell this, got to sell this.
Right.
Wife has to go back to teach, working.
Yeah. Yeah. I've lived in the van.
Yeah.
And so now currently, would I want to go back to that? No. But at the end of the day, what did I take from it? It grew my risk profile.
Yep.
And so now I'm just more comfortable with seeing a vision and saying, hey, let's go for it. But what are the skills that ports over? There's a lot, actually. And this is an interesting question. So what skill ports over from being a lead singer in a rock band that's touring the country, playing for all these people, making records, doing that kind of stuff, into a small business owner? So one of the things I'm going to identify that may not seem straight away is I was also the lead songwriter for the group. So one of the skills that I think really, really ports over, and this is very important, is the ability to craft a compelling narrative. So when I say compelling narrative, in a musical sense, that would be the song, the spirit of the band, the appearance, the approach, all those things is a narrative about what this thing is. In a small business, I think it's so important to have a heart and soul of your business. So for us, how we want to treat people, how we want to be as members in the community, all those things, it's not, our mission statement is we improve lives one sale at a time. And if you think about that mission, it's not we want to make all the money we can make, but we're not a charity either. Sure. So one sale at a time, we want to improve the lives of our team members and our customers. Very lofty goal, but that internal narrative of this is why we do this attracts people. There are certain customers that really get it. They see us do, our barbecue fundraiser. They'll see us do other things within the community that they really like and they're attracted to. By the same token, you're attracting a certain type of team member, right? People who want to align with that vision, who want to see what you see, and they want to be a part of that. Because look, we all think that everybody goes to work strictly because of money. I've never been that way. I know there are people that are, that are just strictly looking for a dollar, but I've never been that kind of person. I've always wanted to work.
They're not the best team members.
Well,
because it doesn't matter how many raises you give them. That's right. They're not happy.
That's right. So I want to be a part of an organization that I feel attached to something larger going on than the sustenance of what we're taking home. Yeah. So what ports over to me, I think, obviously, in the music world, you had to stand up in front of people and you had to command attention and you had to, do all those things. It's the same here, but your song is different, right? Yeah. It's a different type of song that you're writing for the people, and it's got to be catchy, it's got to be memorable, it's got to be meaningful, it's got to be all those things. So to me, the number one skill that ports over is how do we build a narrative around what we're doing, and how do we, communicate that out to our internal customers, our team members, and then to our external customers. Does that answer make any sense?
Yeah. My question is, have you written a song about it. 'Cause I think we're really missing an opportunity here.
I think Bruce Springsteen wrote all the songs about that.
I'm just throwing out ideas. I
Okay.
take it back about not doing a startup. Could we start a jingle company together? Okay.
You know,
Little
it's
jingle.
one of the toughest days. We had a guy come in and he was a jingle writer, and the
Okay.
guy from the radio brought him in, and he was so
Okay.
excited to get in front of me.
Yeah.
And so the guy, he's really excited, and he comes in, he sings his jingle, and I'm just crickets.
Yeah.
I'm like,
yeah. So no, it does make sense to me. It sounds more like you crafted the ability to articulate messaging or communicate.
Right.
Communication to your team and to the public.
Yeah.
To keep the vision clear, to make it clear,
Mm-hmm.
right?
And much of that is verbal, but so much of it is nonverbal.
Yeah.
So much of it is what you do.
Yeah.
You know, you can say say
Yeah.
whatever you want
Well, that's
to say.
another Andy Stanley quote, and this is crazy that Andy Stanley keeps coming back to me. I haven't read any of the stuff in years, but he says, "Is what's on the wall happening down the hall?"
I love it.
Isn't that a good one?
I love it.
He's
That's so good.
the best at some of those little quotes, but I remember it.
Hey, sounds like a songwriter.
Sounds like a songwriter.
That's exactly
he
right.
is a former musician, actually. I think I remember him talking about that.
There you go.
So, but yeah, I think when I think back to, my dad was a pastor,
Mm-hmm.
and so when growing up, the people around him were volunteers, right? I mean, they were small. These were people. Now, were they good volunteers? Probably not. Were the deacons always nice? No. But it's almost this thing where you have to take a certain, like, people aren't paid to show up and help. And so then even early on, after I went to college, I went to grad school and I helped start some churches. And so I was in that nonprofit world as well. It was like every one of these people could just not show up tomorrow and I couldn't do anything about it. And I need them, right? And so taking some of that skill set of how to deal with people and applying that to business, I kind of just had I didn't have to read, it just came naturally to me a little bit.
Well, so for you, now you just said it comes naturally to you, and I believe that it does. But if you had to articulate why you were able to have success within that world, why, like what was it working with people that you felt like you did a good job of?
I think that, and some might disagree with this, but I feel like I do care about people, right? And so, there's a lot of self-assuredness with me that comes along with some of this, is saying, hey, I know I can make you successful.
Also makes for a really good cult leader.
Yes. That's been a debate among my friends.
You just need unwavering confidence.
You get somebody that, if there's a mutual friend and we have very similar skill sets and personality, I'll be like, well, if both of us started a cult, who would you follow?
There you go.
That's a good
I like
question.
that.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Good
right?
question for the office.
Yeah, good question. But yeah, I don't know. So I think just being around that, it just kind of came naturally. It's like, hey, you got to take care of people so they keep showing up and that they're there, right?
Yeah.
And so that's probably been early on. I don't do the recruiting anymore, we came up with a fancy name to not call it recruiting anymore in the real estate world. I can't remember what it was though. Something like team building or something. I don't know. Mm-hmm. But I did that early on, right? I was the recruiter, and so I was bringing in agents, and we grew really fast. And part of that was just, having a level of care and concern, and helping them see a path that we could help them succeed. So.
Oh, it's critical, and even listening to this guy Brad Jacobs, who's been so successful. You think of these titans of business as these almost robot, just powerful megalomaniac, crazy, driven, ambitious, that they're just ripping people's hearts out. They got the sharpest elbows in the room. Yeah. But when you listen to people like that talk that have been successful, you do hear this little stuff. Mm-hmm. You do hear that, hey, they do care about people. You can't, I think it's very difficult to make it, if you don't have that care for people.
Yep.
Because it's one thing to just, remember what I talked about earlier about take. That's a strategy that maybe works once or twice, but to have long-term success, it's got to be a give and take. It's got to be, we're in this for a shared victory.
Yep.
And I think that what you talked about how you care about people and the concern that you show, that's part of the magnet of attraction that brings people to you and hopefully keeps them close to you.
Yep.
Because we do all want more than just the money. The money's got to be right.
Yes.
But we do all want more than the money, at least in my belief.
Yeah. There's a great book, maybe by John Ortberg, but it's called Sticky Teams. And I don't know if we've talked about this before or not, but it's a great analogy. In fact, he's using a church as an example, but he says, but it applies to startups. And he says, when you're a startup, you start off as the track star. You're the one-man show. You do the triathlon, you do this race, you throw the javelin, you do it all. You're the star. Then you turn into, I think his next step is, you turn into golfing buddies. Your team grows, there's 4 of you, but you're all friends. Everybody knows what's going on and you're golfing buddies. And then he says, then as you grow, the next phase is you turn into a basketball team. There's a coach and there's 5 players. Now, some of those players are universal, right? They can play a shooting guard and they can also play center if they have to, right? They're universal. Then he says, but eventually, and this is where, well, he says between the golfing buddies and the basketball is really the hardest one to overcome, because now somebody has to say, I'm not your buddy anymore, I'm the leader. And then now there's, this person's, right, leadership is lonely. Now, it just changes the dynamics. But then where I'm at now, and I just had this conversation with one of my team members, is we're a football team. We have multiple coaches, and every single person on the team has one job, right? And I was using this example to him. I said, the kicker doesn't try to play the quarterback because he's good at kicking. And he says, and then he responded to me, he said, well, I want to be the quarterback. I want to touch the ball every play. And I said, well, everybody else on the team just wants to win. They don't care what position they're playing. They want to win. Right? And that's where, is kind of an aha moment. Like, what do I really want?
Right.
So
Great leadership example. So peeling back, the big question, and we've covered several different topics.
We have.
But peeling back, we're here to talk about a startup versus an acquisition. It seems like it's very situational. It seems like it's you knowing yourself, knowing what you're good at. It seems like there's opportunity on either side, but you might be better suited for one or the other depending on your journey. Now, for people who have listened to this podcast, what do you think what's the value bullet points for somebody listening to this today?
Well, for $1,000, I will consult with them. I'll give them 1 hour.
Right. Okay.
And I'll tell them.
Okay.
No, I think that the number one thing that I would give someone is find a coach to help you make a decision. Now, not saying you have to go pay for a, expensive business coach. Maybe it's a family member, right? Like, I know, in business, I've bounced a lot of stuff off of my father-in-law because he's just a smart, business-minded person. So when it's like a big move, or I would just say, hey, this is ahead. Like, what do you think? And he gives good advice, right? But it might be a successful business person in town. Go take him to lunch and just explain the situation, and that's really where you're going to get some guidance. I really
like that answer. And I think that if there's one takeaway for this question, I think you just nailed it. Because ultimately what I found in our own business is that whenever I go and seek other people who are doing what I want to do, or maybe doing it at a higher level, every time, except for maybe once, and these are busy people, every time I've reached out to somebody who I didn't even know, who maybe somebody knew somebody and I reached out, every time they have been insanely generous, and they have been so gracious with me to ask when I'm asking questions, which are probably dumb questions, right? Which are probably questions that they figured out, 3 decades ago. I've always found that to be an incredible experience that I've walked away from always as a big winner. I think what happens with people is sometimes we're embarrassed or afraid to ask the questions. And you just nailed it. Listen, get over that fear. Ask a question of somebody who's doing what you want to do, and you'll be amazed you'll be amazed at the answers and how far along you can get. Because if it took them 20 years to learn something, this lesson, whatever it is, and you ask them and they can give you those 20 years in 20 minutes. I mean, how valuable is
huge.
that?
Yeah, and I think that, and I don't know if it's fear. I don't know if we want to avoid hearing, or we've already made up our mind. But it's a lot of, I mean, outside help is, and I actually break it down. And this would be a whole nother topic. Where are we at? 55 minutes. A whole nother topic is the difference between a mentor and a coach. Because I think that there's this hang up of I only want to go seek help from someone who's done this and done it well, when that would be a mentor, and they're probably not going to have time to help you.
Right.
But they are a mentor,
Yeah.
like a conversation like you just said. But then a coach is alongside of you, pointing out your weak spots. They don't have to necessarily, I mean, Michael Jordan had a coach and nobody was ever better than him. Right. But he always had a coach, right? These elite athletes, tennis players, whatever, they have these coaches. And all they're doing is, accountability, helping them. But that's another, coaching's great. And mentors are great.
Yeah.
So we were supposed to have Papa John on our next episode, to really get in. But I think we go ahead and get Brad Jacobs. I think we just go ahead
Great.
and move him up. I
Great.
really want to hear from
We'll bump
him.
him up on the list.
Just go ahead and text him. Or
He's on the
whatever.
book tour now, so we can get him.
Oh, yeah.
We can get him.
Yeah.
Listen, I've enjoyed the episode.
Yeah.
I've had a good time. I appreciated your answers.
Yeah.
And,
We got to stay off the phone, because like the other day we just called like real briefly about something and it ended up like a 25-minute business conversation.
That's right.
We save it for this.
All right. So listener questions, bring them to us, because that's fueling the fire here.
Yes, listener questions. Yes.
That's
If
right.
you want to submit, we can mention your name if you want to be mentioned or not.
Okay.
And if not, we'll just keep coming up with our own questions.
There you go.
Yeah.
All right.
Cool. Where can they reach us or find us?
We have an email address.
Did we even name the podcast?
We have a Facebook. We have an email address. So
Busy Smalls,
Busy Smalls.
about small businesses. Now, what's our email? We have a domain name?
I think it's busysmallspod@gmail.com.
Okay. Cool.
That's right.
I like
So
that.
we look forward to your letters.
Yes.